I will get it started. And as you just heard, we are recording this meeting, so do keep that in mind. This recording won't be posted immediately, but I believe a few months out, it is going to go up on the website, so do just be aware of that. I'm Kristen Twardowski, the chair of the Equity and Inclusion Committee at NASIG, and I am so pleased and so thrilled to share with you today a webinar on preventing burnout in new hires, the importance of onboarding support for employees at all experience levels. And it is my very deep honor to introduce our speakers for today. Ilda Cardenas is the Electronic Resources Librarian at Public Library, which is part of California State University Fullerton. She manages access to the library's content, as well as does a ton of work with usage statistics, issues with electronic resources management and employee wellness. And selfishly, I also just want to give her a shout out as the vice chair for the Equity and Inclusion Committee at NASIG, and she's done exceptional work in this sphere. Our second speaker for today is Michaela Keating, who is the Open Educational Resources Librarian at California State University Fullerton. Does a lot of work integrating OER into resources, and she also serves as the subject liaison to women's and gender studies, queer studies, and liberal studies. Her own research spans the intersections of gender and feminism in media, as well as success and retention of academic librarians. So very relevant to the topic that we are discussing today. Ilda and Michaela are going to give some of their presentation, but please do add any questions to the chat, and there'll be some time at the end for a little bit of Q&A. And with that, I will hand it over to Ilda and Michaela. Thank you both.
Thank you so much to NASIG for allowing us to share our research today. We're very excited.
Thanks to everyone who is joining us today. We appreciate you spending your valuable time with us.
Oh boy. Okay. So just a little bit of background about our project. Beginning in the spring 2022 semester, Ilda and I began talking about many of the broad concepts that would eventually become this study. They started as informal conversations between two colleagues navigating a new workplace. And over time, and since Ilda is a wonderful colleague and friend, I began to confide in her about my own feelings and experiences with burnout. And I couldn't understand how I could be in a new job for less than a year and yet somehow feel the telltale signs of burnout. Things like exhaustion, difficulty finding satisfaction in my work, and just that overall feeling of cynicism that was leading to really a big case of imposter syndrome.
In the summer of 2020, the Association of College and Research Libraries put out a call for chapters for an upcoming book on burnout among academic librarians. And we saw an opportunity to explore this idea. I had just gotten a serious bout of mental health issues at this time, so it was very relevant to what I was experiencing at the time. Noticing a gap in the literature, we decided to develop a research study specifically looking at the experiences of recently hired people like ourselves. This is also an issue of equity and inclusion because, as our presentation will reveal, there is an abundance of information on succeeding in the academic world, but typically the hiring and onboarding process goes unmentioned.
So while studies of burnout in academic libraries began almost 30 years ago, there remains a gap in the literature that examines burnout specifically among new employees. And the experience of starting a new job is understood as an inherently stressful experience, but new hires are rarely isolated as a unique group for study when it comes to understanding workplace burnout.
The limited information on this group is surprising when considering the overlap between the stress related to starting a new role and the stress factors that are commonly associated with causing burnout, and was a big part of the reason we decided to undertake this study.
To start, we created a survey that would be distributed among our colleagues, so specifically fellow academic librarians, and we were looking within the Cal State University system. So for our non-Cal State colleagues here, there's a number of universities throughout the state. It's the largest higher education system, and there's lots of academic librarians. So we were interested to see the prevalence of these experiences, but we also knew that we would learn a lot more about the important factors that went into the experience of, into their experiences by communicating directly with individuals. So the survey also became a tool to recruit individuals for follow-up interviews.
During the 60-minute interviews, participants were asked to recall the onboarding they received, their comfort level with the work they were expected to perform, and how their positions were detailed at the time of hire versus how that compared to the work they do daily.
So survey participants were asked to indicate their length of time in the library profession. And out of the total 22 completed responses we got, only one indicated that they were new to the profession with 6 to 12 months of experience. So we didn't actually have anybody that was brand new. 7 of the participants were employed in the library profession for 1 to 5 years. And the largest group of 14 participants had been working in the academic library profession for 5 or more years.
13 participants were starting in a newly created position in their institution, and 9 were filling an existing role. For those taking on a position previously held by someone else, only 2 indicated that there were established workflows and procedures in place. This survey revealed that even those with a reasonable expectation for established practices still found themselves starting from scratch.
Only 5 participants received onboarding at both the institutional and the library levels, while 17 only had institutional level onboarding. And this may be familiar to people as something organized by your university level administrators, where you meet with HR or you meet with the benefits people. And of the 22 participants who completed the survey, only 2 indicated that they never experienced any symptoms of burnout at all. So they were taken to the end of the survey, and the remaining participants all reported that they experienced at least one of the listed burnout symptoms, with the majority indicating that they experienced 2 or more. So when you look at this table here, what you're seeing are a number of responses where the majority of people are experiencing these symptoms either frequently or at least occasionally. So it's very rare that people aren't experiencing some level of this burnout experience to some degree throughout their time in their new position.
Our results are in line with the literature in the field that indicates that librarians, like other public-facing or people-serving roles, are prone to burnout over time. This stands in conflict with the stereotype that libraries must be quiet and peaceful places to work. The rapidly changing and often corporatizing nature of universities is largely incompatible with the ethics and values of librarianship, and often creates an unpredictable work environment that can cause higher levels of workplace stress and employee turnover.
And burnout has serious workplace consequences like absenteeism, reduced productivity known as presenteeism, and job turnover. And for employees, this can mean significant psychological and physical consequences that can be disruptive not only to their professional lives, but their personal lives, including feelings of shame and inadequacy, disrupted sleeping patterns, and emotional collapse. And to learn more about these experiences of burnout and where they were coming from, we turned to the interviews with participants.
We had 8 survey participants who volunteered to be part of the interview process. But due to scheduling conflicts, we ended up with 4 interviewees. All data has been anonymized and names have been replaced with pseudonyms. Our first participant, Abigail, is a part-time contract librarian that recently transitioned to academic librarianship from a career in the healthcare field. Elise, a tenure-track librarian, also recently changed careers from the nonprofit. Cassandra, a tenure-track librarian and department head, is a seasoned academic librarian with extensive experience. And Martin, while not officially having librarian in his title, is a Master of Library Science degree holding full-time employee who engages in many of the same activities like research and committee service as his tenure-track peers.
So while conducting these interviews, we identified several common experiences that fit into 4 broad categories. And these were the structure of onboarding, the nature of peer-to-peer onboarding support, unclear expectations either from department peers or from administrators, and a broad category that we call organizational discord. That's kind of a catch-all to describe interdepartmental conflict and interpersonal conflict. And these categories roughly correspond to several burnout symptoms that were identified by Maslach in her formative study on the subject a couple decades ago.
There are 6 common areas of onboarding identified in a study conducted by Semenza. These include socialization, support programs, checklists, policy review, communication processes, and unique activities. Research shows that processes that were self-directed, independent, or only institutionally focused ranked the lowest in efficacy for helping new hires acclimate to their surroundings and role. Despite the research showing that new hires desire more opportunities to learn about workplace culture, the majority of institutions informally introduce new hires to the workplace culture and environment. This can present a significant disadvantage for individuals who are historically underrepresented in the academy and may not have the generational knowledge learned from a parent or grandparent that worked in academia.
Three of our interview participants received no formal onboarding within their library, and they shared their frustrations with their experience. Cassandra reflected that the way that faculty are onboarded at our particular campus is like, here are the keys to your office, here's your computer, and here's the research tenure and promotion process. And despite previous experience at other institutions, the day-to-day logistics of how her department functioned were not shared, and this lack of knowledge became a source of anxiety for Cassandra. Abigail was in a similar position to Cassandra, where she was not provided with any intentional onboarding when she was hired. Abigail reflected that there was no training in place for me. I was sort of just plopped into it because the librarian that was moving out had already emotionally and physically vacated the position. Martin found himself unsupervised and without training for the first several weeks in his new position. He said, I was filling a position for somebody that had retired, so there was a job description and some expectations, but the person overseeing the department took vacation 2 days later and was gone for 6 weeks. Like Cassandra and Abigail, he also had the sense that his colleagues thought, you're here, you'll figure it out, and expected that he would just jump into the work with no supervision or training required.
Unlike the other interview subjects, Elise experienced a more formalized and structured onboarding process that she later learned was a new initiative on the part of her library's administration. Did you flip the slide?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Through conversations with colleagues, Elise learned that the onboarding she received was new for the library and likely a response to a lack of clarity or transparency of role expectations for previous hires.
The active participation of administration or those in positions of power is a necessary component for introducing a new hire to the workplace. Only leadership can really communicate with the new hire what the expectations of the job are in an objective setting. And this opens a safe communication channel with the new hire that can help them with continued adjustment to their role. Without a commitment to onboarding, like we see in the example of Cassandra, Abigail, and Martin, new employees may find themselves in a vulnerable situation of needing to rely on the knowledge, patience, and courtesy of their colleagues to be successful.
This brings us to our next theme, the impact of peer-to-peer support. Of the various types of new hire support, studies found that the most helpful were meetings with individuals, both supervisors and others in positions of power, and also peers in and outside their department, as they present timely and meaningful learning opportunities. These informal conversations are not only an opportunity for the new hire to gain the essential institutional knowledge needed to be successful, but also to establish connections and create a network of peers. While education and past experience can prepare new hires for many aspects of their jobs, it is a local practice that is important to learn in order to meet the expectations of peers. However, when nothing is written down, it forces more hands-on training of the new hire by existing employees who may not have the time or the inclination to take on a trainee.
Fortunately for Elise, the associate dean took a leading role in organizing her onboarding. She remembered that she scheduled a series of meetings for me with different faculty librarians who clarified things about the tenure and research, helping me get through the faculty handbook as it pertained to my duties. Several librarian peers warned Elise about difficult colleague, and the strained relationships in the library, which helped her to understand her new environment. Elise's access to these informal but critical aspects of library functioning helped with her initial adjustment and also with establishing a long-term understanding of how to work within the library structure and her department. She says they were really tactful about telling me and giving me resources, and I really appreciated that from the other librarians.
Though it did not come from any formal or structured meetings, Abigail found the support of her peers readily available when she needed it. She remembered, my colleagues pretty much across the board have been willing to mentor me. My coworkers have really supported me. Without the formalized training, these relationships still allowed her to gather the institutional knowledge that made her feel like a valued contributor to the library. As a result of these relationships, Abigail felt a stronger connection to the library and overall saw her experience in the role as full of opportunities to learn and grow as a librarian. Supportive relationships with existing employees can play a pivotal role as mentors that allows for the new librarian to safely ask questions regarding the job and the more difficult social aspects that are rarely addressed in onboarding. In the case of Elise and Abigail, their peers banded together to ensure that they would have access to the resources and institutional knowledge necessary to be successful.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I had it on the wrong slide. My apologies. I went backwards instead of forwards. However, despite the positive experiences of Elise and Abigail, this was not the case for Martin, who found many of his new colleagues disingenuous, or for Cassandra, who found some of her colleagues to be outright hostile. Early in Martin's work, he was approached by a colleague who, quote, coached me once that I might want to slow down on some of the changes. And despite this seeming like it's helpful advice, this colleague is not actually offering advice. They are not having an conversation about job expectations, but rather a conversation about maintaining the status quo. Unbeknownst to Cassandra, internal employee conflicts surrounded filling what became her role. So not all of her new team members were welcoming. She remembered that I figured out pretty quickly who was the friendly people, and you learn pretty quickly who's going to make a big deal about you even asking for help or reaching out. Cassandra recalled that she needed to rely on her new colleagues to understand departmental workflows, which meant she did have some informal sort of instruction from one of the staff members, but it's really hard to learn from someone when they're treating you like you're stupid.
One of the common factors that is associated with the anxiety caused by starting a new job and with the onset of the symptoms of burnout are unclear employee expectations. When burnout is understood as a product of mismatched expectations between the new hire and the organization, many of these issues could be managed by more clearly defining new hire roles, the work they are expected to do, and how their success will be measured. If new hires cannot reliably gather information about their job from either their supervisors or their peers, it leaves limited options for having a successful start. Providing workflows and procedures and other forms of documentation communicates to the new hires the expectations of their jobs objectively, easing the burden on what may already be overextended department peers. Without this type of information, new hires may produce low quality work or work that may already be a colleague's area of responsibility, or just missing the mark completely, and it makes them susceptible to workplace bullying.
All of the interview participants had previous experience in the library profession before they entered their current positions. Yet Cassandra, Martin, and Abigail all find the parameters of their positions or what daily workflow should include unclear. For Cassandra, these unclear expectations for her role became a significant source of anxiety. She stated that, "I know I was hired to do something. They created this position for a reason, but I don't think it was a singular or unified idea of what people wanted out of this position." The lack of clarity regarding job duties makes it hard to relate to colleagues, especially when they may have conflicting ideas of what a new hire, in this case Cassandra, is expected to do on a daily basis.
Martin also often found himself frustrated by the lack of direction and the conflict this would cause with his colleagues. I knew what the expectations were, but I was also kind of left on my own. Like, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. It's weird. I knew what I should be doing, but knowing what the boundaries were, the parameters were never really communicated. No one assumed the responsibility to outline the expectations and also the limitations of Martin's position, making it difficult for him to form stable relationships in his department. I would get frustrated because somebody would say, "In the past, this is what someone else did." These unspoken expectations from Martin's peers were a source of frustration that made work in the department a challenge for everyone. Though Martin never had issues finding work to do, he also did not have a good sense of how far he should push with making his changes, or whose support he would need in order to get his peers on board with his attempts to streamline work processes.
For Abigail, the nature of contract librarian work, there's a lack of consistency of job expectations and requirements, and they were often shifting. She went on to say, "They just sort of shuffle you around to whatever needs to be done, and you just have to hit the ground running." The last term is a catch-all that it was actually our chapter editor who helped us come up with this. And it contextualizes many of the experiences of burnout that come from feeling disillusioned about the job or the institution that can often be caused by conflicts among colleagues. The two most frequently cited symptoms in our survey participants and also those experienced by all of our interviewees were feeling cynical or critical about the institution and feeling disillusioned with the job. New hires who experience a divergence between their own expectations of the job and the reality of the position will find the transition difficult. In the case of Elise and Abigail, these symptoms stemmed in part from their work in earlier careers, while Martin and Cassandra struggled to find a sense of belonging in their organizations, which made them feel undervalued.
After coming from a healthcare field where jobs are in high demand, Abigail said the lack of job consistency in academic librarianship was a disappointment. I went to school to be a nurse because I knew I would always be employed. Now I'm here in librarianship, and there's a lot that can just make you feel disillusioned. The main catalyst is as the year comes to an end and you are sitting here at the mercy of the administration.
Elise worked in a nonprofit industry before she pursued a career in librarianship, and many of the departmental politics and conflicts that she saw regularly in academia were uncommon in her experiences elsewhere. And this created feelings of disillusionment. She reflected that I love academia, I love research, I love literature, I love learning, but then there's the politics, and that can be disillusioning. In the nonprofit sector, we don't really get this. I might have a CFO who's being a jerk, but they're not my boss. There's nothing really at stake in terms of job security. That's different in academia because faculty evaluate each other for tenure.
For Martin, the deep feelings of cynicism stemmed from departmental and library-wide conflicts that pointed to a deep division between library employees and faculty. He said, I was incredibly frustrated. I'm going to do the things that faculty do and the things that I've always wanted to do. I presented at the American Library Association conferences. I've given talks. I've written a chapter. And in the end, it's like I'm doing it because I think it helps people and I feel good doing it. The only place I don't think I'm a librarian is here. A perceived lack of recognition or appreciation for one's work can lead to diminished self-esteem, opening the floodgates for further development of burnout symptoms.
For Cassandra, the average workday was fraught with unstable relationships with colleagues in her department, and this added to the anxiety that was initially established due to unclear expectations and her ambiguous responsibilities, all of which created an environment where she had a difficult time feeling settled and respected in her role as a department head. She reflected, we're almost at war in our department. Like there's so many different factions and alliances, and some are hidden, some obvious, and different conflicting priorities, and it can be very hard to navigate. I think it's definitely rooted in a deep-seated insecurity, and they particularly don't like feedback from women in leadership.
Of all the participants in the survey and interviews, Cassandra experienced the most symptoms of burnout. She indicated on the survey that she experienced all 6 symptoms with high frequency, and she shared during the interview that the experience of burnout impacted all areas of her life. In her words, I was not sleeping and tossing and turning before going to work. Extreme anxiety, a lot of bad self-esteem, which prompted me to go into therapy. I'm not taking good care of myself. And for Cassandra, not only struggled at work, but the stress and anxiety also limited her abilities to go out and socialize in her personal time and to participate in activities she normally enjoyed.
Though Cassandra's been in the role for less than 2 years, all the negative experiences in her new position led her to regret her decision to work at her particular institution. And she confided in us that she had, quote, 5 other job offers, And I'm kicking myself every day for not taking one of those other offers. And the sad thing is, reported both on the survey and with our interview participants, none of the individuals communicated their experiences of burnout with their supervisors or administrators. And in the interviews, we found that the reasons for these unreported problems ranged from not wanting to appear weak and unwell to peers to a deep distrust of their administration.
So in conclusion, experience as a librarian, a faculty member, or seasoned researcher does not translate to knowledge of a new organization. Prior knowledge of the profession does not mean that new hires are equipped to handle the challenges and office politics of a new workplace that impacts the way that individuals complete their jobs and fit within their organizations. The assumption that because individuals have received a terminal degree means they will not need extensive onboarding and support is flawed. There were obvious things that were overlooked for all interviewees, such as where to eat lunch, where food or lunch could be stored and heated, access to a working computer, and how to connect to the department printer. These are all added difficulties to those already dealing with so much other stress.
Significant value can be added to this research on the subject by exploring the experiences of those identities that are historically underrepresented in academia. Recent studies have shown that many of those currently working in higher education come from families with multiple generations in academia. Thus, those who were first generation students then went on to be the first in their families to work at a college or university may not have the advantage of learning leaning on family experience to help navigate their new work environment. More research needs to be done to understand the ways that the intersectional identities of new hires impact their onboarding experience and successful integration into their new roles. So based on our research and our investigation of the literature on the topic, we have a few recommendations that we hope those in fields like academic librarianship will find useful.
Peer-led onboarding is valuable, but the roles of those involved need to be outlined and overseen by administrators. When roles for current employees are not clearly articulated by the administration, it can add stress for new hires and existing employees alike.
Transparency across the entire onboarding process is one of the only ways to set new hires up for successful integration into their role. And transparency can start with something simple like sharing why the person was selected for the role, the qualities that made them stand out during the interview process, and what administrators hope new hires will bring to the organization.
Part of this process can also include frank discussions of workplace politics, honest acknowledgement of areas of strain, and identification of potential places for growth. While no library or organization wants to put their least appealing qualities on display, preparing new hires to enter their environment is essential for their success and retention. And it could act as a preventative before the onset of burnout. And
okay.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michaela and Ilda, for that excellent presentation. I would love to open the floor for questions. So if you have some, please do drop them in chat. And yes, the slide deck will be made available after this presentation, so don't you worry about that. While we're waiting for questions to roll in, I definitely have a few of my own, so I'll get us started. This type of survey seems like it's asking people to be very vulnerable and very transparent and talk about their experiences. Can you describe how you set this up to really be a safe place for these people to talk about these really hard realities of their work life?
I guess I can only speak for myself, but going through my mental illness and having to deal with my mental health problems during that time really helped me empathize with the person who was sitting in front of us in our interview. And I had come from a toxic work environment before I came to Fullerton, so that also helped me see what the person was talking about.
From like a research and survey standpoint, we were also very upfront that all information was going to be anonymized, and we were very careful when we created our transcripts to try to be aware of information that may identify individuals. So, you know, they were very also in interviews guarded, which I think we did have some concerns about whether or not people would want to participate, because a lot of these things are very personal, but also knowing that some of them stem from interdepartmental conflict, we had a feeling that that would also be a hard thing for people to open up to. So we just tried our best to like Ilda said, be empathetic, and that created a safe environment, but also just making it clear that we had no interest in blowing up their spot in their role.
No, thank you. That's super helpful. And actually, the next question that came in, I think, builds off of this a little bit. So how can we be frank about workplace politics when the people talking about those politics can also experience consequences as a result of bringing them to light or broaching the subject?
Yeah, that is the very tricky thing. And we do get into this a little bit more in the context of our paper, but providing people with situations where they can have peer-to-peer conversations, that's where we find that these conversations can sort of come up organically. So in the safety of forging a relationship with a new peer, they might share to you sort of the way that Elisa's colleagues did, like, you know, the way it was broached with her was, if you're going to do this project, you know, just be very careful the way that you word your email to this person, because they're the one who's going to kick it back or have an issue. So yeah, it is really hard to have these conversations. And that's why we really stress the idea of building in peer-to-peer conversations, because that's a much more natural place to have those talks. And but it is hard to fully create a safe environment. Anything you want to add to that, Ilda?
The only thing I can think about is, like, it is difficult just because how far can you go until you start, you know, until it starts turning into gossip, you know, and you want to keep it professional, but you also want to be able to navigate, you know, your work environment, whether it's healthy or not. And you know, sometimes I think, well, maybe the administration should, you know, be the first person to be like, oh, you know, this is what's kind of going on, watch out for this. But I don't know if that would be helpful. It might depend, it might just depend on where you are.
And
yeah,
sorry, go on, Michaela.
I was just going to say that the idea of like acknowledging areas of strain doesn't necessarily have to be as specific as this person is a problem and they are not going to want to do anything you say, as much as it can be like people are resistant to change. And that
that's a big one.
Yeah, that at least can prime somebody to say, okay, well, if the overall feeling is that change is a problem and they like things being done the way that they are, then that can at least tell a person like to be slow or thoughtful or broach conversations. Because I think what a lot of new employees find is like they're hired and they take on a role and they think, okay, this is my purview now. and I have a way of doing something that I think is going to be more efficient or going to function better for our users or something like that. And then they could be rebuffed or have a significant blow up from a peer that they weren't expecting.
Yeah, that actually happened to me. So
it happened to me too. And I'm sure there's plenty of people in the webinar who have had that same experience.
No, and you both are starting to get at another question that's popped up in chat, which is really about, how can we balance not wanting to let our personal biases get in the way of an employee's relationship with their coworkers? We don't want to poison the well for new employees necessarily just because we have history that we're bringing to it, while still being able to warn people around, okay, this could potentially be an issue for you. What does this balance look like?
Gosh, it's tough because it's, personal bias, and it's certainly the case. I mean, you might, and this is sort of where we found with Martin's case, where he had sort of disingenuous peers who were saying things like, oh, you might want to slow down on some of these changes and things like that. And I think providing people with the space to have a lot of interactions with people, as opposed to, obviously mentors are a really important thing, but when you only have a new hire clustered with one person, or two people, or like two new hires and one peer mentor, like that's not really a broad enough network to really get a sense. So, I think exposure to many people, not just even in their department, but across departments, can be helpful for that. What do you think, Yilda?
yeah, I think that would help the most, just because like this question just brings me like my past experiences. And then even as a librarian, I remember I had started a job, and within the first few weeks, one of my colleagues came up to me and she was like, watch out for, this other colleague, one-on-one privately. And it started off, this person's really nice, but they can be really pushy. And then, I started trying to put boundaries with this other person, just kind of like, I didn't really think, I didn't really know the person very well at that point, and it exploded in my face. So I guess you have to find out for yourself whether or not that person is safe or not, if that makes sense.
It's very tough. No, it's definitely very tough. I think that's honestly the big takeaway from this webinar. So we have a couple set of questions that have come in that are really talking about resources. The first one I want you to address, if you don't mind, is, if you are working in a toxic environment, it can be really demoralizing because you take concerns to HR or your union, and then you discover that the perpetrator is a really high level or someone who can't really be dealt with. Are there like support groups that you've identified to help someone in this situation, or are there other recommendations that you might have to help people from feeling so alone and so isolated in these situations?
Wow, this is such a great question, and I'm the union rep for our library, so this is very deep to my heart too. And I think I personally don't know of any anonymous support groups. We didn't really research that, and now that I see that, I think that's definitely another really interesting avenue for research. And so the union rep in me wants to say that communicating with people is more powerful than anyone ever thinks, and being put into isolation is almost a strategic thing on the part of those people who have power and that don't want that to be disrupted. And that feeling of isolation is really hard to break through. And if your workplace is toxic, as it sounds like it would be in that particular case, it's really hard do that. But yeah, I mean, and I see in the chat, somebody says that they have somebody who helps with interpersonal conflict. I think our university has stuff like that too. I don't know how useful it is.
We have it.
Yeah, that idea of somebody being very high level and untouchable, like that I think is the most toxic situation. And that's really hard because that's where all those power dynamics come in. And this is also something that is an E&I issue that we didn't even really get to explore a whole lot, is that, I don't have many friends who are in academia. My family is not in academia. So having somebody to talk to that can understand the politics or relate to the ins and outs of it is really hard. And it's absolutely isolating. Oh, and I see somebody just put in the chat, there is a support group for librarians. Oh, low morale. That's like my next topic that I'm interested in. Thank you for sharing that, Kathy. Yeah. That's so great.
I share what Michaela said right now about my family doesn't know anything about academia. I'm the only academic in my family, and I have a big one. And so when I come to them, before I used to go to them with my work problems, and I just couldn't find any help, any sort of, so it helps to have friends who are other librarians in the field. And like, I feel like our research has been really healing for me. And it just kind of started as an informal conversation where, like, you just have to throw it out there, and how you're feeling, and see what happens. If it's met with like, oh, that's your problem, then maybe that's someone you don't want to talk to.
So the other resource request that came up, I think, is related to this idea of isolation, particularly in the past few years, which is, did you stumble across any research that looked at onboarding scenarios within teams that are either partially or fully remote? Because that's a big issue that I think we're all facing currently.
Yeah, I didn't see a ton of literature done on it yet, but I know for sure Elise was hired during the pandemic, and Cassandra started very shortly before the pandemic. And Ilda and I actually also found ourselves in that situation. We were working on campus for 6 or 8 months, and then we're at home. So onboarding in that sense went out the window completely for most people. And I think it just added extra pressure because starting a new job is already isolating. And with the trends that we found, where people weren't being told the very, very basics, like here's like how you connect to the printer. And I mean, when we brought up lunch specifically because it was so shocking to us, but like Martin didn't know there was a microwave where he could heat up his food for almost like a year. And that is the kind of stuff that's very dehumanizing. And then you have sort of that as your baseline, and then you move it to you're at home and trying to do this stuff on your own. Like it's even worse. So I think the purpose in all of this is that people just have to be much, much more intentional with onboarding and accept that there's a lot of socialization that goes into this. That's not even necessarily just about your job. It really has to be about connecting people with other individuals, whether or not it's to discuss work or favorite TV shows. It doesn't really matter. You have to be able to build those relationships. What are your thoughts, Ilda, on the work from home situation?
I guess in my personal experience, I just felt like everyone's going to know that I don't know anything. And so it was not a very good time. And I was working really closely with somebody else who I thought was training me, and just the more and more I realized I didn't know a lot. And so it was just difficult.
I want to give a shout out to a couple of comments in the chat that, you know, sometimes you're in a bad situation, maybe like you were at your previous employer, ILDA, or elsewhere, and that is your job. For one reason or another, you can't leave it. But there are, avenues for professional organizations maybe, or supports that you can get outside of your institution proper. Kate mentions here that being involved in her state's professional library organization or some of the smaller local ones allowed her to build a non-toxic network and kind of say, okay, are you also experiencing this? Or Susan shouting out NASIC, which I do hope it is that space for some people. But what role do you see the broader library community in playing in approaching these issues of burnout, onboarding, et cetera?
I think we need to recognize that we're not, these happy-go-lucky places, we really aren't. And it's just like and this, I'm still speaking from experience, it's like, it feels like every place is toxic. And there's toxicity everywhere in varying degrees. So learning how to navigate it as a professional is really important. Do you have any thoughts, Michaela?
Yeah, I agree with you in the sense that like that libraries, I think people really love to idealize, and and anybody working in an academic library, you hear how important you are until it comes to a budget conversation, and then you're on your own. But there's an idealism about the profession and the work that makes it seem like it should be really like we're all in accord and we're all getting along, but we're all just people, and it's different personalities. And somebody mentioned the baby boomer mentality, and generational differences are really, I think, coming into focus in a lot of libraries where people are working longer and they're staying in positions longer, and then new people are coming in and they may be experiencing that conflict of how things get done and what a library should look like and what a library should do. And I think as a profession, we just need to be open with each other about the shortcomings. And I think there's been a lot of growth in the profession in the last couple of years in just even acknowledging the disparities in race and class and gender identity in the profession. So, and I think this could also be one of those things that could be part of our discussion is, that people are burning out. And a lot of them are. I mean, it was a self-selecting survey, but the fact that only 2 people of our sample said that they'd never experienced any burnout at all is kind of shocking. And then that so many people were experiencing so many of these symptoms. It's a common thing. And I think it's something that we as an organization owe to each other to tackle and to make it a priority. And I would love to see something in ACRL or ALA or some working group form that sort of focuses on this and finds ways to make this a priority, because we can't lose people to the profession. We can't have people being disillusioned in this way. It's not a service to those that we are supposed to be supporting.
Yeah, and I do want to note that the chat has this great conflict or comment that we are a space where there is the potential for a lot of conflict, both, in our day-to-day work and outside of the work that we do. So just kind of acknowledging that. So we only have a few minutes left, but I would love Ilda and Michaela, if you could leave us with a last thought maybe that says, if you had a recommendation for how to implement this at your own institution, what would your main recommendation be for making these changes in onboarding?
I have an idea. Bring it up to your supervisor or your administration. Like, it's their job to onboard you successfully. And it's hard, but you just have to you know, sometimes you just have to, you just have to do it. And if you don't get the help that you need, then, you know, you'll have to like recalculate how to navigate that, but at least your administration knows.
And I think having a good thinking in good faith here, when we shared our results with our dean and our associate dean, they were genuinely shocked and they were very upset to find that people were in these positions. And it wasn't like a, you know, we've talked a lot about toxic workplaces and things, but I think there are also a lot of workplaces where it's just status quo rules the day. And it's typically how you onboard is just, you know, whatever. But I think one concrete thing that helped me a lot was having a professional like in our building who was just like, let's go as a group and get lunch. You know, like we're obsessed with lunch. I don't know how else to explain it, but like, it's a really important part of the day. But, you know, like setting up an expectation of like, we're going to do this and we're going to do it with a group of people so that it's not that pressure of feeling like you're with a supervisor or somebody that you don't, you know, takes the pressure off and just feels natural. And it doesn't have to be lunch per se. It can be, you know, a daily walk. It can be coffee, check-in, just being much more hands-on with people and not in a micromanaging job way, but just in an interpersonal way. Because if people don't feel safe to communicate, they're never going to bring up workplace issues. So that's always my suggestion. And we recently did a study about lunch. So that's why we keep talking about the importance of lunch.
Now I wish we'd talked about that study for this meeting, but next time. Well, I do want to keep us on time, so I will just wrap us up and say thank you again, Ilda and Michaela, for the very thoughtful presentation. Can you remind folks, is this paper published somewhere where they could read it?
It's in a book that's coming out. ACRL is publishing a book. I want to say that the title is very specifically like Burnout and Academic Librarians. So I think it should be coming out sometime in 2022. So hopefully soon.
All right, so I hope everyone keeps an eye on that. And thank you to everyone who attended today. You had exceptionally thoughtful questions and comments in chat. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll, deal with these issues more in further webinars, I'm sure. So thank you all. And yes, there will be a recording. Won't be up immediately, but there will be one around. So thank you all.
Thank you.